Hey guys, tonight we travel far back beyond records, beyond names, into the shadows of ancient time. You crouch beside a flickering fire in a dark stone shelter. The night air smells of ash moss and something animal. A mother wraps a small child in deerskin. The child is different. His eyes are almond-shaped. His tongue peeks from a round mouth. His limbs are shorter. His gaze drifts. The clan watches. No one speaks. There are no words for what they see. You shift your weight on the damp earth and realize this isn't a story with beginnings. It is a slow unfolding of perception, of naming, of misunderstanding. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting clarity or justice. Because tonight's story isn't about heroes. It's about forgotten lives, misread bodies, muted treatment, the long sleep of history, and the few times someone stirred to look. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still with me, post your location and local time. I like to know where the night finds you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the rhythms of ancient days. No books, no diagnoses, just quiet living. Prehistoric people leave behind stone tools, broken bones, ash rings, and crude burials. The child you saw by the fire will not be remembered in writing, but his skull may rest beneath soil, its shallow nose bridge and wide tongue groove telling a silent story. In Spain, archaeologists unearth a site called El Cedrón. Inside, the remains of Neanderthals lie close together. Among them, a young individual with a cranial deformation. Not Down syndrome, but a clue physical difference was not always punished. This child lived, was buried with the group, and perhaps even cared for. Historians still argue whether prehistoric people showed compassion or simply left weaker individuals behind. But some bones show signs of healing, survival after injury. Someone must have fed and watched over them, maybe even loved them. Time moves forward. Mesopotamia builds ziggurats. Egypt erects pyramids. Still no word for Down syndrome. But in Egyptian tomb art, figures with round faces, almond eyes, and stocky bodies appear. Some scholars believe these may represent individuals with Down syndrome. Others insist they're stylized representations of childhood or divinity. The line between God and human was often blurred. In ancient China, records speak of children born with soft bones or weak qi. Descriptions match various congenital conditions. Some children are hidden, others are left to die. The practice of infant exposure leaving a child in the wilderness was not uncommon across ancient cultures. You walk through a silent olive grove in Greece. A scroll rests beside a flickering oil lamp. The philosopher Aristotle writes, "Let there be a law that no deformed child shall live." Cold words from a warm land. The Greeks loved harmony, symmetry, perfection. Physical difference broke the pattern. The polis was not designed for those who could not contribute. But not all was so stark. In Roman society, households were large and varied. Slaves, freedmen, merchants, and children filled them. The paterfamilias held power over life and death. A baby with obvious differences could be accepted or rejected. In Pompeii, Graffiti and murals show people with dwarfism in everyday scenes. They are jesters, gods, lovers, workers. Present, if not fully respected. Still, Rome had no category like Down syndrome, just bodies that fit and bodies that didn't. In Judea, in the 1st century, rabbinic texts record complicated debates about purity, healing, and the soul. Some children were called mute or foolish, but they were not erased. They appear in legal discussions, in temple rituals, even in parables. Jewish law made space for those who could not fulfill every obligation. There was pity, yes, but also presence. You climb the stone steps of a ruined synagogue. The wind whistles through cracks in the limestone. Somewhere a mother once brought her child to be blessed, though he spoke no words and did not look into her eyes. In these ancient worlds, the label did not exist. But the people did. They lived and died without fanfare. Their stories are not told, but sometimes in art and bone and whispered law, their shadows stretch forward. You keep walking. The ground hardens beneath your feet. Civilization grows louder, but not always kinder. You step from the dust of forgotten tombs into the blinding white columns of ancient Athens. The air smells of crushed herbs and drying ink. The marble is cold beneath your sandals. Statues of men with chiseled muscles and poised expressions line the agora. Every face seems deliberate. Every proportion obeys a hidden equation. This is a world built on the ideal form, and your presence here feels like an intrusion. In the classical world, beauty is logic. The body reflects the soul. To be noble is to be well-shaped. To be malformed is to be morally suspect. You hear the echo of philosophers debating under olive trees what makes a human worthy. They do not mention those who stumble when they speak, or whose eyes do not align, or whose limbs are shorter than the others. The Greeks did not have a term for Down syndrome, but their obsession with symmetry and control left little room for divergence. In Sparta, newborns were inspected for signs of weakness. A baby who appeared frail or deformed might be cast into the chasm of Mount Taygetus. Historians still argue whether this happened widely or was more legend than law. But the ideal was clear strength over softness, precision over peculiarity. You drift now into the Roman world. The toga hangs heavy on your shoulder. You pass a columned home where the master presides over a vast household. His power includes life and death. A newborn with unusual features is brought to him. The father may keep the child, or expose it. The word exposure feels distant now, but it meant leaving the baby in a field or on a hillside to die or be taken by strangers. Roman law did not require exposure, but it allowed it. And in a culture where utility and legacy were prized, a child with visible disabilities might be seen as a burden, unless they amused. Roman entertainment often involved spectacle. Dwarfs, people with large heads or asymmetrical faces, were sometimes kept as novelties in wealthy households. They were fed, clothed, trained to dance or joke. Their presence did not mean acceptance. It meant they could be contained, displayed, owned. Still, not every life was visible. Many people with cognitive or physical differences likely lived in the countryside. hidden from record, protected perhaps by poverty and distance. In rural Italy, life was labor. If a person could tend animals or carry water, they had a place. If not, they sat in the shade and waited for what came next. You pause by a crumbling Roman mural. In it, a group dines at a long table. One figure's face is rounder, softer. Their hands rest quietly in their lap. Scholars debate whether this is an artistic style or an accidental trace of a real person, someone who lived quietly despite the odds. In medical texts from Hippocrates to Galen, you find no mention of Down syndrome. But there are words for simple-minded slow or possessed by humors. Some physicians believed the womb's heat shaped the baby. Others blamed celestial misalignment. The idea of congenital difference was not medicalized. It was moralized. Yet Rome had gods for everything. And sometimes disability blurred into divinity. The god Vulcan was lame-cast from Olympus, but forged divine weapons. His temples glowed with firelight. His followers did not mock his limp. In another corner of the empire, Jewish teachings offered a different view. The Talmud made provisions for those without full understanding. These individuals were not punished. They were exempted from fasting, from legal penalties, from certain religious duties. There was no name for Down syndrome, but there was language for mercy. Still, mercy did not always mean belonging. You move forward. The empire fades. The columns crumble. Roads crack. A different age rises. But the ideal of the perfect body lingers like smoke after incense. For the Greeks and Romans to be fully human was to embody order. And those whose faces or voices broke that pattern were rarely given a name, only a sideways glance. Before you go, you pass one last inscription carved in Latin. It marks the grave of a child who lived only 5 years. The epitaph calls them joyful, gentle, and blessed. There is no diagnosis, but there is memory. Someone loved them even if history did not. You walk into darkness again. The flames of Greece and Rome have burned out. In their place, the quiet embers of early Christian Europe glow beneath the fog. You enter a village where the church bell tolls slowly. The scent of damp wool and wood smoke fills the air. Children whisper in Latin phrases they don't fully understand. The world is shrinking, cloaked in scripture and survival. It is the early medieval period. The Roman Empire has collapsed. Roads decay. Cities shrink. Writing survives mostly in monasteries guarded by monks with ink-stained fingers and weary eyes. In these centuries, explanations shift from logic to faith. Illness and difference are no longer errors of nature, they are judgments from God. You pass a hut where a mother cradles her child. His head is round his ears, small, his tongue wet and protruding. He does not coo. He does not cry often. The neighbors avoid their eyes. In this world, deformity is seen as a sign. Perhaps a curse for sin, perhaps a divine test. Sometimes both. The Church speaks of original sin and divine grace punishment and salvation, but leaves little room for clarity. Still, not all reactions are cruel. Saints' lives' hagiographies tell of strange births, mute children, and miracles involving the innocent. Some saints are said to have healed simple folk. Others performed wonders through those who could not speak. You hear one story of a mute boy in Ireland who suddenly sang hymns when touched by a saint's relic. Historians still argue whether such stories reflect real individuals or symbolic lessons, but they hint that people with cognitive or developmental differences were present and noticed. You pass a chapel where a carved figure crouches under a pillar. Its features are round, exaggerated. Some say these carvings represent green men or demons. Others believe they show local villagers with disabilities frozen in stone by stonemasons who saw them daily. In early Christian theology, the soul mattered more than the body, but the body still shaped how one was treated. Those with obvious differences were often denied roles in liturgy. A priest had to be whole. The Levitical standard persisted: no blemishes, no lameness, no defects of sight or limb. You arrive at a hilltop where a monastery rises. Inside its thick walls, monks chant softly, copying texts. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, emphasizes community labor and order. There are passages about caring for the sick and the poor. Monasteries often offered food and shelter. For some individuals with disabilities, this was salvation. They might sweep floors, tend gardens, or simply be allowed to stay. But the help came with hierarchy. You were not a brother. You were a guest, an object of charity, not agency. In the village below, the rhythms of peasant life leave little room for reflection. If you can tend chickens or twist wool, you belong. If not, you depend on your kin. A child who cannot speak or walk may still be fed. But they are rarely named in records. They do not inherit land. They do not take oaths. They do not marry. Church writings of the time used the Latin word idiota to describe those lacking instruction. It does not mean what it does today. It simply means someone unlearned, perhaps unable to be taught. Another word, natural fool, emerges later in English. It can be gentle or mocking depending on the speaker. Some royals keep fools in court. These are not always jesters by choice. Sometimes they are individuals with developmental disabilities kept for amusement or as living omens. Their presence does not signal progress. It signals containment. You pass a baptismal record in a dusty ledger. A child is baptized John, but no surname is listed. The priest notes that the boy is quiet and slow. That is all. But someone brought him forward. Someone gave him a name. Across the continent, burial practices vary. In some places, individuals with disabilities are buried in churchyards close to the sacred. In others, they are pushed to the edges both in death and life. The medieval world was deeply hierarchical, and those who didn't fit were often placed at the bottom. And yet, you find kindness too. In a convent in northern France, a nun writes about a young girl who does not speak, but smiles always. She is described as beloved by all. There are no further details, but the tone is clear. By the end of this period, the word innocent becomes important. People with intellectual disabilities are seen as lacking the capacity to sin. They are not punished by the church for failing to confess or fast. In a strange twist, this sometimes protects them. In a world obsessed with damnation, to be outside sin is to be untouchable or ignored. You sit in the back pew of a chapel. The candles flicker. A child hums softly beside you. He will not be written into history. But he lived, was heard, and for a moment shared in the silence that shaped the world. You step beyond the chapel walls and walk toward a gray stone building rising above misty fields. Its walls are thick, its windows narrow. The wind hums like quiet chanting through the cracks. This is not a castle, it is a monastery. And tonight it becomes the refuge and the prison of many who did not fit elsewhere. You approach a side entrance where a monk waits in silence. He watches a mother arrive, leading a boy with soft features and uncertain steps. The boy clutches a scrap of cloth. He does not speak. The mother kisses his head, then leaves. She does not turn back. Inside the monastery is orderly. Bells toll to mark time. Prime, terce, sext, none. The monks work in rhythm. Some copy manuscripts. Some till the garden. Some stir thick soup in large black pots. And some, the youngest brothers, care for the ones brought here. Quiet children, aging adults, those who wander, stare, or repeat sounds without meaning. This is where people with Down syndrome often ended up if they survived infancy and were not sheltered by their family. The monastery offered food, warmth, and above all, order. But it also imposed silence. These individuals were not educated in letters or catechism. They were not made monks. They were guests, sometimes called the poor, the innocent, or the afflicted. Monastic records do not say Down syndrome. They say slow, helpless, or without reason. Still, the rule of Saint Benedict called for care. Let care be taken of the sick, above all it reads. This care included bathing, clothing, feeding, but not inclusion. There was no integration. The boundary remained. You hear stories whispered between stone halls of boys who followed monks, silently mimicking gestures, who clapped during Mass or sang off-key during Vespers. Some were tolerated. Some were scolded. Some were simply removed to a quieter corner. One chronicle from the 12th century mentions a young fool who was allowed to ring the church bell. His joy in the task is noted. His name is not. Historians still argue whether this monastic care was compassionate or simply custodial. For some, it offered life. For others, it ended possibility. You wander through the dormitory where rough straw beds line the walls. One is smaller than the others. Its blankets are thicker, tucked neatly. Someone cared. In England, during the later medieval period, leper hospitals and almshouses began to rise. These were charitable institutions run by religious orders, nobles, or towns. They housed the sick, the elderly, the poor, and those with disabilities. Often people with Down syndrome were sent to such places not for healing, but for containment. You pass through the open gates of one such hospital. A wooden plaque reads, St. Mary's House of Mercy. Inside, a dozen people sit on benches, their heads bowed. One rocks gently. Another smiles without apparent cause. A nun brings porridge. No one speaks much. Records from such places often list expenses, bread, linen, candles, but rarely describe the residents. You find a rare exception, a 14th century entry notes. Margaret, the sweet-natured one who does not speak, but laughs much. It is the only time her name appears. Outside the institutional walls, life is less structured. In villages, people with cognitive disabilities were often kept at home if their families could manage. These individuals sometimes performed small tasks, gathering kindling, herding ducks, sweeping dirt floors. They were not educated, but they were often named. You sit by a hearth where a grandmother stirs stew. Her grandson sits on the floor, rocking and humming. He does not make eye contact, but when she hands him a crust of bread, he grins. The fire crackles. The moment passes. Even in towns, some people with Down syndrome appeared in public spaces. In medieval markets, individuals with disabilities were not always hidden. Some danced for coins. Some simply wandered. Their presence was part of the social fabric, pitied, mocked, sometimes protected. Still, in legal terms, they were often grouped under the term natural fools. This term covered a wide range of conditions, from Down syndrome to epilepsy to intellectual delay. They were considered outside the law, unable to bear witness, inherit property, or marry without permission. You visit a courtroom in York. The judge reviews a case where a man accused of theft is defended by his sister, who says he knows not what he does. He is simple. The judge asks no further questions. The man is returned home. There is no punishment, but also no justice. He is not seen as a person under the law. In castles, noble families sometimes kept innocents in their service, feeding them, dressing them, even giving them titles like court fool. While some of these individuals were trained entertainers, others had visible disabilities and were kept for amusement. This was not kindness. It was possession. Yet you hear one story of a fool in Burgundy who saved a child from drowning. He is given a new cloak and a day of honor. His name is never written, but someone remembered. In monasteries, sanctuaries, and shadowed homes, people with Down syndrome lived lives mostly undocumented. Their footsteps did not echo through history's marble halls, but sometimes their laughter did. Quiet, off-key, uninvited, and utterly human. You step into the flickering half-light of superstition. The world is still medieval, but the ground feels unstable beneath your feet. A storm is coming not of rain, but of interpretation. This is a time when meaning is pulled from lightning dreams, or the way a child looks at the sky. You walk through a narrow village lane. The buildings lean in close. Smoke curls from crooked chimneys. A baby cries behind one wall, the sound thin and strange. The midwife emerges, face pale. She crosses herself. The child, she says, is touched. The word hovers in the cold air. No one asks what it means. This was the reality in much of medieval and early Renaissance Europe. People did not have the language of genetics or medicine. They had saints. They had demons, and they had guesses. A child born with the facial traits we now associate with Down syndrome. Almond eyes, flat nasal bridge. Small stature might be called an angel child, or a changeling, or cursed. You enter a wooden chapel dimly lit by beeswax candles. A priest reads from the gospel. He looks up and notices a boy seated near the altar. The boy is smiling, rocking slowly. He wears homespun wool. His tongue slips from his mouth. The priest pauses. He has seen this before. Sometimes these children are believed to be vessels of grace. Their innocence is seen as purity, their silence as closeness to God. One nun in a 13th century convent writes of a boy who sings to the angels in sleep. He never speaks aloud, but she believes he sees more than others. Historians still argue whether this view was compassionate mysticism or just a way to explain the unexplainable. But the coin flips easily. In the next village, a similar child is feared. When crops fail or livestock sicken, the villagers remember his strange laugh. They whisper that he brought misfortune, that he is not quite human, that he is other. You wander into a cottage where a mother rocks her daughter who is 6 but cannot stand. A neighbor warns her the child draws spirits. She must be kept hidden. The door is shut, the window covered, and so silence gathers again. The belief in changelings was common across northern Europe. In these tales, fairies steal healthy babies and leave behind their own marked by odd behaviors. Silent crying delayed movement. Children with disabilities were often seen as these imposters. The result: some were abandoned, some were left in the forest, some were subjected to cruel cures, salt, fire, cold water. You find one case recorded in an Icelandic saga. A child is described as strange-faced and slow of speech. The villagers suspect a changeling. They attempt to drive it out by placing the child on a hot shovel. The saga ends before telling what happened next. But not every interpretation was dark. In parts of southern Italy, shrines developed where families brought children touched by heaven. These children were placed near relics or blessed with holy oil. One girl, described as soft-eyed and silent, was kept beside a saint's statue for 3 days. Her family waited for healing. When none came, they took her home and never returned. Art from the time offers conflicting clues. In stained glass and illuminated manuscripts, we sometimes see round-faced figures with slight eyes and short limbs. Are these children with Down syndrome or symbolic depictions of innocence? The line is blurred. In a manuscript from the 14th century, a scribe draws a small boy holding a candle beside a monk. The child's face is unusually shaped. His posture is awkward. A marginal note reads, "He knows not our speech, but he sees the light." Was it a metaphor? A memory? No one knows. The tension between miracle and madness was constant. Some believed unusual children were saints in disguise. Others thought they were possessed. In one monastery record, a boy who could not speak was brought before the abbot. When the boy hummed a Gregorian chant without prompting, the monks declared it a sign. He was allowed to live within the cloister, though never as a brother. In another story from Brittany, a girl who stared at walls for hours was thought to be having visions. A local priest disagreed. He had her moved to a distant shrine hoping for a cure. She died there at 10. You find legal traces, too. In early English law, the term idiot appears in charters to describe someone who cannot make contracts or own land. But legal documents sometimes show guardians appointed to care for such individuals. Property was not given, but it was protected. That meant somewhere someone mattered enough to be remembered. Still, in many towns, difference was a spectacle. You enter a marketplace where people gather. Among the jugglers and musicians, a child with a large head and awkward steps follows a man with a drum. The crowd laughs. Coins are thrown. The child waves. It is not kindness. It is toleration for now. A merchant nearby tells you about the mute boy who sees the future. He believes the boy's condition makes him more attuned to divine patterns. You ask what happens if he stops amusing them. The merchant shrugs. Even in nobility, stories surface. In a castle tower, a noble family hides a daughter who never learned her letters nor her prayers. She is not harmed, but she is erased. Her name is not included in the family ledger. And yet, you pass a chapel built in memory of a boy called Thomas who died at age 9. The inscription says, "Though he spoke not, he brought peace to our home." That's all. No mention of difference, no mention of shame. You sit by a stream. The water runs slowly over stones. In the village behind you, children chase each other. One lags behind. He moves differently. But no one pushes him. Not today. The wind picks up. The bells ring again. The line between miracle and madness remains unsteady. But you keep walking. You follow the sound of footsteps across hard-packed soil. The land has changed. Forests give way to fields. Villages cluster around manors. The year is 1350, or perhaps 1420. The exact date doesn't matter. What matters is the rhythm. This is feudal Europe, where time is counted in seasons, not hours, where status shapes every breath you take, and where your body defines your future. You arrive in a village just before sunrise. The air is cold and smells of sheep and churned soil. A rooster crows once, then again. Doors creak open. Women carry buckets. Boys chase geese. You watch a man with wide-set eyes and an open mouth lead a donkey along a path. His steps are uneven, but he walks with purpose. The others nod to him. No one stops him. No one stares. This man, you realize, has Down syndrome. But no one here calls it that. They call him simple, or good-natured, or God's little one, and they let him be. In agrarian communities, survival depends on contribution. You don't have to be fast. You just have to help. People with mild to moderate disabilities often found a place. Gathering firewood, hauling water, watching over chickens. Tasks that did not require language, only presence. You step into a cottage built of wattle and daub. Inside, a woman kneads bread. A girl, perhaps 11, sits beside her. The child hums softly and smacks her lips. Her limbs are short. Her hair is thin. She is not spoken to directly, but her mother cuts her a slice of apple and places it gently in her palm. This child, too, is cared for, quietly, without ceremony. Historians still argue whether rural life was kinder or crueler to people with disabilities. There were no institutions, no doctors, no experts, just neighbors. Some were harsh. Some were patient. Some simply didn't notice, or pretended not to. You walk toward the fields where men drive wooden plows through muddy rows. A teenager follows scattering seeds from a worn sack. His face is round. He hums tunelessly. A younger boy throws a clod of dirt at him. The teenager flinches. A man nearby smacks the younger boy on the head. The work continues. People who could not contribute at all, those with profound disabilities, often lived indoors. They might sit by the hearth or in a corner. They were fed if food allowed. But when famine came, priorities shifted. Survival was not philosophical. It was arithmetic. Church records from the period sometimes mention helpless children. These entries are sparse. One reads, "Baptized Agnes, weak in the head." Age 8. Another buried child. unknown simple. The ink is faded, the names disappear. In some villages, the local priest kept an eye on these individuals. They were not expected to confess. They were not punished for missing Mass. But they were often used as symbols. Innocence, foolishness, sometimes faith, sometimes fear. You find a sermon written in the 15th century that tells of a boy who could not speak, yet knelt at the bell. The priest calls it a miracle. The village agrees. For 1 week the boy is treated gently. Then the harvest fails and memory turns. You step into a manor house, large stone, narrow windows, echoing halls. A noblewoman writes letters while her servant brushes her hair. In the corner, a young girl rocks back and forth. She is the lady's niece, born wrong, they say. Her father sent her here to be hidden. She is not mistreated. But she is never introduced, never named in conversation. Elsewhere in the stables, a boy with slurred speech feeds horses. The other servants call him Tom the Kind. His laughter is loud and sometimes misplaced, but he works, and he stays. In larger towns, people with visible disabilities became part of the street life. Some begged. Others were taken in by religious guilds. A few worked as assistants in shops, carrying bundles or sweeping steps. Their value was not measured in intelligence, but in usefulness. One English town record lists a Peter the Fool who was given bread weekly by the Bakers' Guild. He is described as harmless. He lived in a shed behind the mill. When he died, the church rang a bell. A small funeral was held. No relatives attended. The idea of the village fool became common in folklore, often portrayed as naive but lucky, wrong in the head, right in the heart. These tales reflect a real pattern: individuals with intellectual disabilities becoming semi-official mascots of their communities. Not equals, but not enemies either. You hear one such story from a Welsh village where a boy called Emrys was believed to bring good luck if he touched a bride's hand. For decades, brides sought him out. He was fed at weddings, given ale, then left to wander home alone. Still, the line between care and exploitation was thin. In France, a boy with Down syndrome was said to dance for coins in the square. His mother dressed him in bright clothes. The crowd laughed. He smiled back. But when he grew older and less cute, the coins stopped. He was no longer brought out. In some places, a local lord might take in such individuals, not out of kindness, but obligation. They were seen as part of the useless poor, a burden to be distributed. If they caused no trouble, they stayed. The term natural fool appears more often in records by the late 1400s. It is sometimes affectionate, sometimes not. One will notes, "To my fool Giles I leave a cloak and bread." Another, "Let the fool be sent to the nunnery. He frightens the hounds. You sit beneath a willow tree. A boy climbs awkwardly to your side. His shirt is torn. His eyes crinkle in a broad, toothy smile. He offers you a lump of cheese, though he has only 2. You take it. He nods content. The village moves on. The wheel turns. People with Down syndrome live here not as patients, not as statistics, but as part of the rhythm, sometimes loved, sometimes mocked, but rarely erased. You rise with the smoke from an iron chimney. The village is quieter now. The bells ring in a deeper tone. The seasons have turned. It is no longer the medieval age. You've stepped into the early modern period, where laws harden kingdoms, centralize, and poverty becomes a public problem. This is the age of charity and the birth of bureaucratic labels. You walk into a small English town. The streets are paved poorly. The houses still lean, but there are more signs. Wooden boards painted with symbols of trade. Above one, a painted loaf. Above another, shears and thread. And down the lane, a painted pair of scales. This is where rules begin to shift. Inside the parish hall, a clerk dips his quill and records the names of those who seek aid. The poor roll, they call it. In England and many parts of Europe, the state begins to intervene in poverty. The poor laws are born first as relief, then as sorting mechanisms. Who deserves help? Who does not? You glance over the clerk's shoulder. The page reads, Roger, age 19. Simple. Lives with mother. Given 2 loaves weekly. Another line says, Ellen, aged woman. Crippled. Deemed deserving. And lower down, Martin Fool. Wanders. No known kin. Sent to workhouse. People with Down syndrome, if they survived childhood, often ended up on these rolls. Not because their condition was understood, but because they were visibly different. And different meant dependent. But dependency had to be justified. The poor laws divided the poor into 2 categories: the deserving, those who could not work, like the elderly, the infirm, and often people with disabilities, and the undeserving, those who could work but did not. This line was cruel, but it also created records. For the first time, we glimpse names, ages, descriptions. You step into a small alms house built with stone and charity. The sign reads, For the meek and the halt. Inside, a dozen residents sleep on straw mats. One hums as he plucks at a broken shoe. His face is wide, his hands soft. He does not speak, but he is fed. He is clothed. He is watched. Alms houses like this, funded by wealthy patrons or churches, often took in people who were innocent or natural fools. These terms were vague. They covered people with intellectual disabilities, cognitive impairments, and mental illness. No one distinguished. They only labeled. Historians still argue whether this rise in institutional charity helped or harmed. It saved some from starvation, but it also marked a shift from kinship care to public control. In cities, beggars were more visible, and with visibility came suspicion. Laws passed to restrict public begging. People with disabilities had to carry tokens or papers proving their right to beg. Those without were whipped, jailed, or expelled. You walk through London. A boy with soft features and a lolling tongue sits by a bakery. He holds out his hand, then withdraws it. A woman scolds him, gently places a roll in his lap and walks away. No one looks twice. But this was not always mercy. You enter a parish meeting where town elders debate who may stay. The phrase of no use is repeated. One man speaks of his neighbor's son, the simple one who throws pebbles in the well. They vote to remove him to the workhouse. Workhouses rise across England and the continent, places where the poor are housed, fed, and made to work. These are not hospitals. They are not homes. They are factories of moral judgment. If you cannot work, you must prove it. And people with Down syndrome often failed both tests. They could not work efficiently, but they also did not appear sick. So they were moved, again and again. You walk into one such building. The air is damp. The floor is stone. A boy sweeps in circles, over and over. His broom never moves forward. No one corrects him. No one helps him. He is simply passed by. In France, a man named Jacques is listed in the ledgers of a local hospital. Age 28. Silent. Round of face. Does not comprehend commands. He is kept in the same room as the dying and the mad. No category exists for him, so he is called useless. But he is kept, perhaps because no one else will take him. In Germany, the early 1600s bring new laws about vagabonds. People seen as wandering without reason can be arrested, branded, or forced into labor. For someone with Down syndrome unable to explain themselves, this often meant confinement. Not for safety, but for order. Yet in quiet corners, care continued. You visit a farm where a woman watches over her brother. He is 30, but plays with sticks and stones. She speaks of him as gentle, helpful, and pure. He guards the chickens, she says. He never forgets to close the gate. He hums when it rains. In such places, people with disabilities were not studied or classified. They were known. Their habits, their moods, their roles, these things mattered more than their diagnoses, which did not yet exist. In art, depictions remain scarce. But in a Dutch painting, a young man with soft eyes and a wide grin carries a loaf on his head. Scholars wonder, was this realism a portrait? Or just a trick of the brush? In literature, fools begin to take symbolic form. Shakespeare writes of natural fools, fools by nature, and poor Tom. These characters sometimes speak truth, sometimes nonsense. They are both comic relief and tragic mirrors. They reflect the outsider's gaze, the voice no one expects. Some argue these characters were inspired by real individuals. Others say they were metaphor. One writer describes a lad with a crooked tongue and holy laughter. The phrase stays with you. You return to the parish records. A final line reads, Thomas buried behind the chapel. Knew little, loved much. No monument marks his grave, but the paper remains. You wake beneath gray clouds. The wind has shifted. Church bells still ring, but now alongside the ticking of clocks. A man in a long coat walks past carrying a small leather case of surgical tools. The Renaissance has bloomed, and with it, a new obsession, the body. You walk the cobblestones of Florence, of Paris, of Nuremberg. The streets smell of ink vinegar and soap. People are beginning to ask new questions, or at least old questions in Latin. What is man? What is the mind? How does the body work? And most importantly, how can it be measured? In lecture halls, men in robes dissect corpses. They sketch what they see, bones, nerves, organs. Their notes are meticulous. Their eyes are sharp. But what happens when they meet a body that doesn't fit? One student records a cadaver with a small skull and flattened nose bridge. He sketches the shape, but writes no further comment. He does not know what he's looking at. He only knows it is not typical. This is the age of classification, of early anatomy books bound in leather and displayed in oak libraries. People with disabilities, especially visible ones, now attract attention not as souls to be saved, but as objects to be studied. You find yourself in a chamber where a physician examines a boy brought by his father. The boy's speech is slow. His features are round. The doctor writes, "He has the form of a cherub, but the wit of a beast." The words sting, but the record remains. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance improved or worsened life for people with developmental disabilities. There was more curiosity, more documentation, but also more objectification. In the courts of Europe, the natural fool becomes a fixture dressed in motley made to entertain. A few gain status. Many do not. They are given names like Simple Simon, Poor Ned, or Little Giles. Their lives are marked in footnotes. You step into a grand salon. Oil paintings line the walls. One shows a boy of about 10 standing beside a noblewoman. His head is tilted, his gaze distant. His hand rests on a stuffed bird. Some say he was her son. Others claim he was a foundling. No one knows his name, only that he was included visibly but silently. As the Renaissance advances, ideas about the mind begin to splinter. Some thinkers argue that the soul is separate from reason. Others claim that intellect is divine. Those who lack it, then, are seen as either animals or angels. You enter a physician's office. On the shelf, skulls are arranged by size. Phrenology has not yet taken hold, but the impulse is there. Measure, compare, rank. A boy is brought in. His tongue protrudes. His hands are stubby. The doctor measures his head and declares it childlike. He suggests the boy will never grow in mind, though his body may. In some towns, these boys and girls are placed in homes, not by force, but by suggestion. The family cannot manage, the records say. He disturbs the neighbors. And so institutional doors open, slowly, quietly, firmly. You visit one such home outside Antwerp. It's run by nuns. The floors are clean, the windows narrow. Children sit on benches and sew, some expertly, some not at all. A girl with a round face rocks gently. The sister places a hand on her head and murmurs a prayer. It is not unkind, but it is a stillness imposed from above. Outside townspeople speak of these places as merciful. Better there than wandering, better cared for than mocked, and sometimes they are right. But the line between care and control blurs more each year. In art, new forms emerge. You walk through a gallery where one painting shows a boy with an unmistakable expression, open-mouthed eyes, unfocused. The painter does not mock him. He does not explain him. He only paints. Some viewers laugh. Others stare. A few look away. One German pamphlet from the 1600s describes a traveling man with a dull wit and crooked fingers who could repeat whole sermons if he heard them once. The author calls it a marvel. Others think it a hoax. The Renaissance love of spectacle is not limited to art. Human difference becomes a commodity. Courts parade wonders of nature. People with visible disabilities are brought forward at banquets, at festivals, at royal births. Look, they say. How strange. How rare. A child with Down syndrome might be called a moon-faced wonder or eternal innocent. They were sometimes made into symbols of simplicity or divine mystery. But they were never asked. You follow a ledger in a Dutch archive. It lists a household with 8 children, one marked simply Peter Simple. Cannot marry, kept at home. This in itself is not unusual, but what follows is rare. Given shoes yearly, plays the flute. Someone noticed, someone remembered. Elsewhere, legal frameworks grow more rigid. People are classified as idiots or lunatics. Idiots from birth, the law says, are incapable of managing property or consenting to contracts. A child with Down syndrome, if named, would fall into this group. Guardians are appointed. Wills are rewritten. Still in rural areas, life moves as before. You visit a farm outside Florence. A boy trails behind his father, carrying feed. He hums. The cows are calm when he enters. The villagers call him Il Piccolo. They give him bread. They do not ask questions. In one Spanish village, a festival honors Saint Philip. Children dress in white. Among them a girl with small hands and a bright scarf claps out of time. She is not corrected. Her mother claps with her. But the current is shifting. The Renaissance gave people with Down syndrome a kind of visibility. But it was not the right kind. Not medical, not legal, not protective. It was curious, detached, measured. You sit in a garden courtyard. A young man kneels in the dirt, arranging stones into rows. No one tells him to stop. The light is golden. His tongue rests on his lower lip. A priest watches from the window and says, God made him simple so the world might be gentle. The priest then turns away. The garden remains quiet. The sun is higher now. The roads are straighter. Paper is cheaper and pens scratch longer. You've entered the 18th century, an age of empires, wigs, powdered faces, and ticking clocks. The Enlightenment is dawning. The body is measured, the mind is mapped, and rationalism becomes a way of life. It is also the century when the family begins to recede and institutions step forward. You arrive at the edge of a city in England. A tall brick building stands behind a high iron fence. The sign reads, The Royal Hospital for Idiots and Imbeciles. The words are not whispered. They are engraved in stone. Inside, beds line the walls. Most are occupied. Boys and girls with varying differences stare at the ceiling rock in silence or chatter to themselves. A nurse moves between them, adjusting blankets, placing spoons in mouths. You hear no cruelty, but you hear no conversation either. This is one of the new idiot asylums, a type of institution that rises across Europe in the 1700s and into the 1800s. It is different from earlier almshouses or monastic care. This one claims science. It claims improvement, but its methods are still confinement. People with Down syndrome were not yet named, but they were now noticed more often. Those with the distinct facial features and developmental delays were grouped under catch-all terms: idiot, feeble-minded, imbecile. There was no differentiation, only categories of deficiency. You look at the records. One entry reads, Robert, age 10, round head, quiet, smiles frequently, cannot read, admitted by father. Another, Anne 17, simple girl, utters few words, no dangerous behaviors. Families brought their children to these places often out of despair, or shame, or hope. the hope that maybe with structure, with discipline, the child could become more normal. But these places were not homes. They were systems. Scheduled, cleaned, watched. Their goal was containment, not connection. Historians still argue whether the rise of institutions was driven by compassion or control. Some say they offered shelter where families had none. Others say they were dumping grounds for the inconvenient. You walk a hallway where paintings hang portraits of donors, founders, men in wigs and sashes. There are no portraits of the residents. In France, similar institutions open under Enlightenment ideals. The Salpêtrière in Paris once housed prostitutes and beggars. By the mid-18th century, it includes girls labeled idiots. Some are taught simple tasks. Others are left to wander the halls. One is described in a doctor's notes, a gentle girl who stares at her hands and laughs. No further comment. In Prussia, a home for the feeble-minded records its population. Of 112 residents, 16 are described as mongoloid in feature. This is not yet a diagnosis, just a word chosen by physicians to describe the faces they did not understand. You sit in a doctor's study. Books line the walls. A skull rests on the shelf. The doctor explains that the brain is the seat of reason, and reason is what separates man from beast. Those without it, he says with confidence, are incomplete. Not failed, just unfinished, like tools that cannot perform their function. And yet even here, traces of care appear. One matron writes in a letter, "There is a boy in Ward 3 who smiles when I hum a certain tune. I do not know why, but he follows me after. And sometimes he hums it too." Outside the asylums, families face increasing pressure. Society begins to define norms. A child who does not speak, who does not grow at the expected pace, is a problem to be solved or removed. You step into a quiet parlor. A mother sits with her daughter, who is 15, but plays with fabric scraps like a toddler. The mother sighs, then folds a blanket for her lap. She says, "She is mine. But I do not know what to do with her." In upper-class homes, children with disabilities are often hidden. Visitors are not told. A sister is sent to the country. A brother travels abroad for health. The euphemisms pile up. Behind them, silence. In literature, the innocent child appears again. Sweet, unaware, pure, but always passive, never a speaker, never a subject. Meanwhile, cities grow, and with them the visibility of those who do not conform. You watch a group of children play in the street. One lags behind, clapping irregularly. The others dart away. A shopkeeper shouts at him. A woman leads him off by the wrist. Institutions begin to publish their findings. Charts, classifications. Of the 30 boys admitted, one report reads 5 showed signs of progress in buttoning coats. Another says, of the girls, 6 could recite their names after 6 months. This is what progress looks like now. Metrics, measurables, not relationships, not joy. You follow a corridor to a small schoolroom. A teacher holds up a card. The child blinks. The teacher repeats, and again, and again. No frustration, just method. One child succeeds, another does not. The latter is reassigned to laundry, the former to shoe polishing. In one rare case, a physician describes a girl with mongoloid appearance who sang hymns and followed simple instructions. He writes, "She is the most agreeable of the group. She does not disobey. She does not weep." The praise is chilling. Even so, not all families surrendered their children. In rural homes, parents still cared in silence, still taught names, still watched over those who would never leave. You visit one such farm. A boy, perhaps 12, watches the chickens with fierce attention. His mother says he has never let one escape. She says he laughs when they squawk. She says that's enough. And maybe for her it is. But the tide is turning. Society wants categories. Institutions want results. And those who cannot speak for themselves are given labels instead of names. You leave the hospital. The doors close behind you. Inside, laughter echoes from one far room. A nurse pauses. She does not know who made the sound, but she smiles briefly, then turns away. You feel the air thicken. The streets are busier now. Horse-drawn carriages rattle over cobblestones, and soot smears the sky. It is the 19th century. Cities swell with industry. Factories belch smoke. Telegraph lines hum. The world is moving fast except for the ones who can't keep up. You step into a city hospital in London. Inside, a physician pulls out a file labeled Classification of Mental Defectives. For the first time, there is a serious attempt to sort people by their perceived capacities. Idiot, imbecile, moron. These words, now considered cruel, were once technical, created to describe levels of cognitive delay. And in this movement toward classification, Down syndrome finally gets its first name, though not the right one. You sit in a clinic in Surrey. The year is 1866. A doctor named John Langdon Down is examining a young boy. The child has a flat nasal bridge, slanted eyes, and a small mouth with a protruding tongue. Down makes detailed notes. He notices other children with similar features. He begins to group them together not as individuals, but as a type. He calls them the Mongolian type of idiot. Historians still argue about his motives. Down believed he was being respectful. He described these children as gentle, affectionate, and trainable. But his theory was rooted in flawed racial science. He thought they represented a regression to a more primitive racial state. The term Mongolian stuck for over a century. You sit with that name for a moment. Mongolian. A word stolen from a people, applied to children with a genetic condition, used in textbooks, in medical reports, in courtrooms. And yet John Langdon Down also created a school Normansfield, where he offered education structure and routines to children considered unteachable. His son later ran it. The buildings were clean, the staff kinder than most. Some children lived their whole lives there. They painted, they sang, they gardened. Still, they did not leave. You walk the corridors of Normansfield. In one room, a child places wooden blocks in a row. His face is blank, but his hands are careful. A matron watches. She doesn't interfere. She doesn't smile. She just records it. Elsewhere in asylums, less progressive people with Down syndrome are warehoused alongside the profoundly disabled, the mentally ill, and the elderly poor. The goal is not learning, it is segregation. The 19th century loves measurement. Phrenology rises, measuring skulls, categorizing personality. A small head, idiocy, a wide skull base, possibly criminal. One report describes a man with Down syndrome as having a short cranial vault and docile temperament. It does not mention his name. In the United States, similar patterns unfold. The first American institutions for the feeble-minded open, the Pennsylvania Training School, the Massachusetts School for Idiotic and Feeble-Minded Youth. These schools claim to train, but they also confine. You walk through one such place. The walls are whitewashed. Children line up for inspection. A boy with slanted eyes and a round face is marked as trainable but limited. He is taught to brush shoes. He repeats the motion for decades. His family visits once a year, then stops. Back in England, Down's writings gain influence. His descriptions become standard. His flawed racial typology spreads. For nearly 100 years, people with Down syndrome are described as mongoloids in scientific literature. The term is not challenged until the late 20th century. But in Victorian society, there is no question. Difference must be labeled, ranked, and managed. You step into a parlor where a mother hides a photograph in a drawer. Her son, 5 years old, sits stiffly in a chair. His tongue sticks out slightly. His coat is too large. She does not display the image, but she kept it. Elsewhere, children with Down syndrome are occasionally portrayed in newspapers, usually as objects of pity. The affectionate mongoloid boy, one headline reads. Another, a curious case of arrested development. Their stories are told for others, never for themselves. Still, moments of light remain. In a Scottish village, a child named Evan is kept home. His father, a stonemason, says he is no scholar but a good boy. Evan feeds the goats, sweeps the path, and sings nonsense songs. The neighbors call him kind. And when he dies at 26, the church bell rings once. Then again, you find another such story in rural France. A girl named Lucette is baptized, confirmed, and taught simple prayers. Her mother says she never lies, that she cries when others cry, that she loves the smell of oranges. You realize something: the institutions may have named these people, but it was families who remembered them. By the late 1800s, scientific journals begin collecting data, charts showing frequency of Mongolism, diagrams comparing facial angles. Doctors compete to name features, short neck, single palmar crease, flattened profile. But they never describe the laugh, or the handhold, or the silence before bedtime. One physician writes, "These children are incapable of full citizenship, but they are often good-natured and content." His tone is detached. The children remain passive objects. In art, you find almost nothing. A few medical illustrations, a sculpture of a boy with bent limbs, no names, no stories. In legal records, they appear as wards, incompetents, subjects of care. Guardians are appointed, wills amended. The law does not recognize them as agents. And yet in a tiny diary you read a different story. Henry helped me pick apples today. He laughed when one hit me on the head. He is slower than the others, but he notices birds more than anyone I know. That's all. You sit with that line. It is not science, not policy, but it is human, and it's written in pencil now faded. The 19th century classified, sorted, and named. It began the medical gaze, but it also locked doors, silenced voices, and confused labeling with care. You walk out of the hospital. A boy is sitting in the courtyard stacking stones. He's humming. A nurse opens the door and calls for supper. He doesn't move. She waits. Then he stands up slowly, carefully, and follows her in. You feel the hum of progress. The century has turned. Electricity flows through cables, steam engines thunder across continents, and ideas are coded into books, charts, and diagnoses. It is now the early 20th century, and standing at its threshold is a man still casting a long, complicated shadow, Dr. John Langdon Down. You enter his office again, this time later in his life. His hair has thinned. His papers are thicker. He reviews old case notes. He never renames the condition. Mongolian type of idiot remains in every file. The ink is permanent. The title persists. Down's contribution to medical science was the first attempt to group individuals with similar cognitive and facial characteristics into one type. This is important. It marks a step toward understanding, but it is also steeped in Victorian racial theory, where Asian facial features were wrongly viewed as inferior or primitive. Historians still argue whether Down's naming was accidental, observational, or malicious. His notes describe these children as cheerful, affectionate, and manageable. That, to many Victorians, was enough reason to contain them. The problem is this: names stick. And for the next 100 years, children and adults with Down syndrome will be called mongoloids by doctors, teachers, judges, and families. The mislabeling becomes global. You sit in a university lecture hall in 1910. A professor displays a chart on the blackboard. 3 categories: idiot, imbecile, moron. Each is defined by IQ, though the testing is still crude. A student raises a hand. Where does Mongolism fit? The professor replies, among the idiots. You walk down a hallway where charts cover the walls. Each face is photographed in profile and head-on. Boys, girls, all with the same flat noses, almond eyes, and open mouths. Their names are redacted. They are numbers now. In medical literature, Down's descriptions are copied, modified, expanded, but the core remains. A congenital form of mental deficiency marked by certain craniofacial features, hypotonia, and reduced intelligence. No mention of joy or autonomy. Meanwhile, in institutions, people with Down syndrome are placed into the lowest functioning groups, often deemed untrainable, often overlooked even by other patients. They are the quiet ones, the ones who sit and watch. You visit one such institution in Boston. The year is 1912. A girl named Ruth is 12. She has lived here since she was 4. Her file says, largely silent, cooperative, unable to dress self, good appetite. That is the full assessment. In some schools, educators begin experimenting with training programs. These involve repetitive motor tasks, simple memory exercises, and basic hygiene routines. For children with Down syndrome, progress is slow. Many plateau early. The teachers note arrested development. The assumption becomes fixed: they will not improve beyond a childlike state. You peek into one classroom. A boy stacks colored blocks again and again. The teacher times him. He finishes. She nods. He smiles. No one speaks. In the home of a wealthy family, a daughter named Clara is never mentioned in dinner conversations. She lives in a room upstairs. A nurse feeds her, bathes her, dresses her. The family tells guests that Clara is not well. No one asks. still small shifts appear. A Scottish physician records that children with Down syndrome form affectionate bonds and display clear preference for music. These remarks, tucked between cold observations, suggest attention beyond symptoms. A few doctors argue for more humane care. They say these individuals are not dangerous, not mad, just different. But their voices are quiet. The louder voices focus on costs, on control. You sit in on a public health meeting. The issue is capacity. The city's asylums are full. One official proposes early classification, identify those with Mongolism at birth, remove them before age 5, place them permanently. This, he claims, will reduce burden. In rural towns, families still hide their children, but some try home education. They teach names, colors, music. Results vary. One boy learns to read 3 words. His mother writes, "He knows the word milk." That is enough. In print media, individuals with Down syndrome appear in human interest columns. One story features a boy named Teddy who waves to every passerby in town. He is described as a harmless half-wit with the heart of a child. Readers smile. But Teddy never speaks for himself. In Europe, the same patterns unfold. Institutions rise, classifications deepen, and Down's name is attached to more and more entries. Down's idiocy becomes a common term. Later it shortens to Down's syndrome. Yet Down himself never knew the chromosomal cause. That would come later. In 1959, long after his death, a French geneticist named Jérôme Lejeune discovers the true source, trisomy 21, an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, a physical fact, a genetic explanation. But by then, the damage of the earlier name had long been done. Back in the early 20th century, no one speaks of chromosomes. Only behaviors, only limitations. You visit a carnival sideshow in 1920. A poster reads, "The Smiling Idiot." Inside, a man with Down syndrome waves at the crowd. He claps. The audience laughs. He bows. Coins are tossed. Then the curtain falls. It is not kindness. It is curiosity. Distant. Detached. One rare exception appears in a personal memoir. A nurse writes, "James is different from the others. He cries when I leave the room. He likes to touch the ivy leaves on the window ledge. He hums while I sweep. I think he knows more than we think. That's all. Just a note in a margin." In a cemetery outside one asylum, you walk past small, nameless stones, some marked only by numbers. Among them lie hundreds of children and adults with Down syndrome buried without family, without ceremony. And yet in a small village nearby, an old man named Edwin rocks on his porch. He has Down syndrome. He was never institutionalized. He can't read. But he remembers everyone's birthday. He sings hymns from memory. He pets the dog gently. His neighbors wave. They do not stare. You enter a tent striped in red and gold. The smell of sawdust and roasted peanuts drifts through the air. The crowd gathers beneath the canvas dome. The year is 1915 or 1928, or maybe 1932. It doesn't matter. The lights dim. A drum roll begins. The ringmaster announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be amazed." A curtain parts. And there, standing under the spotlight, is a young man with Down syndrome. He smiles. The crowd gasps. This is the era of freak shows and traveling circuses, of curiosity, cabinets, and dime museums. And in this age, people with visible differences are not just noticed, they are displayed. The term freak is broad. It includes giants, dwarfs, conjoined twins, bearded women, and those with physical or cognitive disabilities. People with Down syndrome are often part of this circuit. They are introduced as the happy fool, the eternal child, or even the moon-faced wonder, names chosen not by them but for them. Historians still argue how much agency these performers had. Some were exploited, taken from institutions, paid pennies paraded for amusement. Others earned livings, traveled, made choices. The reality is murky. The records are sparse, and the voices of the performers are largely silent. You stand beside a stage in a traveling show outside Kansas City. The crowd laughs as a man with Down syndrome dances in circles, his shirt oversized and his grin constant. A handler whispers instructions in his ear. He waves at the audience. They clap. Then they leave. He sits alone picking at a torn bootlace. Backstage performers live in small wagons. Some have friendships, even families. But the public image is fixed. They are there to entertain, not to be understood. One man, known on the circuit only as Benny, is remembered in a manager's journal as being good with animals, calm during storms, and prone to humming hymns. No last name, no birthplace. In dime museums, permanent freak show attractions in urban centers, individuals with Down syndrome are placed in mock classrooms or fake idiot wards behind glass. Patrons pay to watch them sit, walk, or speak. A placard explains their condition using outdated science and crude stereotypes. You walk past one such exhibit. A girl sits beside a doll. Her eyes are half closed. She rocks gently. Visitors murmur. No one says her name aloud. Elsewhere in private homes, families hide children with Down syndrome from view. Doctors sometimes suggest this. Best to keep them indoors, they say. Too upsetting for guests. The child plays in a back room. The curtains stay drawn. In rural areas, some families still include their children in daily life. You visit a farm in Nebraska. A boy named Elias, age 17, feeds the hens. His mother says he talks to them every morning. She says he remembers the name of every neighbor's dog. She says she never considered sending him away. But across the country, the trend is still separation. The rise of eugenics fuels this. Public talks and pamphlets promote the idea that intellectual disability is hereditary, dangerous, a threat to national strength. You attend one such lecture. The speaker points to a chart titled, "The Threat of the Feeble-Minded." It shows lines of descent arrows pointing from a moron mother to a mongoloid child. The message is clear: these people must be kept apart, sterilized, contained. This thinking spreads to policy. Institutions begin to perform forced sterilizations. Individuals with Down syndrome are often selected without explanation, without consent. You walk through an asylum where the doors are locked from the outside. A nurse tells you they're harmless, but we can't let them breed. Her tone is casual. In one room, a woman lies on a cot. Her record says she was sterilized at age 16. She never knew why. Photographs from the time show rows of children in uniforms, blank stares, identical poses. Among them, the round faces and almond eyes are unmistakable, but the captions say nothing. Still, moments of softness exist. In one institution in Ohio, a staff member writes, "Charlie sings every morning. He loves to button his coat. He helps in the laundry. He told me he wants to see a train. Such notes are rare." They do not appear in official reports. In the public eye, people with Down syndrome remain curiosities. A few appear in vaudeville acts. Others perform in medicine shows. One girl is taught to recite Bible verses. Her manager claims she is the proof that God makes no mistakes. The audience cries, then moves on. Magazines occasionally feature stories of lovable defectives, always portrayed as simple, pure, unchanging. The narrative is fixed. They are like children forever. They do not want or choose or dream. But behind closed doors, they do all of those things. In a home in upstate New York, a man named Paul, age 25, keeps a notebook. His spelling is inconsistent, but he writes, "I want a dog. I like to go outside. I want to see snow again." The notebook is found years later in a drawer after the house is abandoned. You visit a parish that offers a weekly service for special children. They sit in front. They sing loudest. One girl claps off beat. An old man pats her hand. He remembers her name. Still, for most, the options are few. Be hidden, be locked away, or be displayed. You walk into a small schoolroom in a state hospital. The teacher hands out crayons. A boy draws a tree with 4 trunks and a red sky. No one comments. The drawing is placed in a folder. It will never be returned to him. By the late 1930s, eugenics policies have gained ground in many countries. People with Down syndrome are seen as part of a growing problem. They are not artists, not family, not citizens. They are statistics. But in some corners, resistance stirs. A nurse in Minnesota refuses to participate in sterilizations. A priest in Michigan takes in a boy whose family left him at the church steps. A teacher in Oregon starts a class just for slow learners. She keeps every drawing they make. And in a photograph dated 1939, you see a girl with Down syndrome sitting on a swing. Her dress is wrinkled. Her hair is braided. She is smiling not for the camera, but for whoever stood behind it. That at least remains. You walk under a steel archway that reads, "School for the Feeble-Minded." The year is 1942. The wind is sharp. The grounds are vast, fenced, and orderly. Gravel crunches beneath your shoes. Buildings stand in rows. Classrooms, dormitories, kitchens, and behind one door, a room filled with quiet. Inside, children sit at small desks. They rock. They murmur. Some draw circles on paper. Others gaze out the window. In the front of the room, a young girl with Down syndrome claps her hands twice. The teacher nods. She does it again. This is not school as you know it. This is early training. The term special education does not exist yet, not in the formal sense. What exists instead is a patchwork system of training schools, custodial homes, and educational colonies for children with intellectual disabilities. These programs vary wildly in quality. Their goals are not academic. They focus on hygiene, obedience, and basic labor. You flip through a teacher's notebook. It lists objectives for each child. Brush teeth, fold towel, tie shoes, recite own name, tasks repeated daily. Each success is noted, each failure ignored. One boy with Down syndrome is praised for wiping his mouth after meals, another for learning to place his cup on a tray. This is called progress. Historians still argue whether these schools offered dignity or discipline. Some families believed they were giving their children a chance. Others were simply told to leave them there, and did. You visit a mother in Chicago who describes how the school promised her daughter would learn to read. But after 3 years, the only lesson was how to button a coat. She never saw a book. In some institutions, children with Down syndrome were grouped together isolated from even other slow children. Staff believed their presence disrupted the others. One administrator called them too passive to teach, too docile to discipline. You peer into a dormitory where 20 children sleep in identical beds. One girl wakes in the night and hums. A nurse hushes her. She lies back down. Outside the school system, opportunities were scarce. Public schools did not admit children with developmental disabilities. Families who tried were turned away. Not fit for the classroom, the principal might say. Try the hospital, the teacher might advise. Some states passed laws barring mentally retarded children from public education altogether. They were considered uneducable. The term appeared in policy, not just prejudice. You read one report from 1945 that says, children with Mongolism are happiest in environments of routine and calm. Academic instruction is not advised. Still, a few educators pushed back. One teacher in Pennsylvania created a one-room class in her basement. She accepted children others rejected. They learned their names, colors, songs. She wrote, "One boy, Tommy, recognizes the number 7. He points to it on his own." Her report was never published. In institutions, education often blurred with labor. Older children were trained to scrub floors, prepare food, wash linens. This was framed as life skills, but the tasks also kept the institutions running. Unpaid, undocumented. You step into a laundry room. A teenager with Down syndrome sorts towels by color. She does not speak, but her rhythm is precise. The supervisor writes, she shows consistency. No disruptive behaviors. Suitable for continued custodial training. This phrase repeats across reports. Suitable for custodial care. It means they won't leave. It means they can't. Some families visited. Many did not. One file includes a letter from a mother. I pray that Jimmy is learning something. I miss him, but I know he's in good hands. The envelope is stamped, "Return to sender." Outside the walls of these institutions, in small towns and rural homes, some families refused to send their children away. They created their own routines. One family taught their daughter with Down syndrome to use picture boards to choose breakfast. Another taught their son to sort mail at the local post office. You visit a living room where a woman shows you a quilt made by her sister. She couldn't sew straight lines, she says. But she liked colors. So I marked the patterns. She picked the fabric. We made it together. In the early 1950s, a few experimental schools opened. Private, expensive, staffed by specialists trained in speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral science. These schools began using new terms: educable, trainable, and profound. Children with Down syndrome were almost always placed in the lowest category. You watch one class where children repeat phrases. "I am a boy. This is a chair." The teacher prompts again and again. The words are memorized but not always understood. Still, for some, this is the first classroom they've ever known. Government agencies begin collecting statistics. One report estimates that 60% of children with Down syndrome are institutionalized by age 10. Another claims 80% receive no formal education. The numbers rise. So do the walls. But cracks form. In 1954, the Supreme Court rules that separate is not equal in Brown v. Board of Education. The case is about race. But soon, advocates begin applying the same logic to disability. Parents ask, "If my child is a citizen, why can't they attend school?" You sit in a courthouse where a mother testifies. Her son, age 9, was denied enrollment. He has Down syndrome. She holds up his drawings. "He knows what a tree is," she says. "He knows our dog's name." The judge listens, but the law does not yet require schools to say yes. Still, something shifts. A teacher in California starts a pilot class for children with developmental disabilities. One student, George, learns to recognize stop signs. Another, Maria, sings the alphabet. Their names appear in the school newsletter. A small win, a quiet one. In media, public interest grows. Magazine stories feature special children, always smiling, always simplified. They are portrayed as kind, innocent, permanent children. The public accepts this version. Few question it. But in one photograph, you see something different. A boy with Down syndrome holds a pencil tongue between his lips, drawing carefully. A teacher kneels beside him. She's not correcting. She's watching. That image doesn't make headlines, but it matters, because it marks a beginning not of cures or miracles, but of recognition. In a corner of one institution, you find a drawer of papers, crayons, names spelled in crooked letters. One says, "I am Sam." Another says, "My mom loved me." The grammar is wrong, but the meaning is right. These are not outcomes. They are lives, still waiting to be seen. You walk into a quiet office where blinds cast long shadows across a desk. On the walls, framed certificates. The calendar says 1956. The file folders say something else. Eugenics program, sterilization consent form, mental defectives board, and one name typed in uppercase, Martha Mongol type. This is where the narrative darkens. The early to mid-20th century saw not only classification and schooling, but policies intended to limit reproduction. If you were deemed unfit by behavior, IQ, or appearance, you could be sterilized. Legally. Often without full understanding. Sometimes without any consent at all. The targets were often people with intellectual disabilities, and among them, people with Down syndrome were especially vulnerable. You visit a state institution in North Carolina. The nurse brings in a girl named Martha, aged 16. Her record lists her IQ as 42. Her diagnosis, idiocy of mongoloid type. A doctor signs a form authorizing surgical sterilization. Martha is told it's a routine procedure. She returns to her dormitory with stitches and no explanation. She never has children. She never knew she wouldn't. Historians still argue whether these policies were driven by science or fear. Eugenicists claimed they were improving society, reducing the burden on welfare, preventing undesirable traits from spreading. But their logic was built on false assumptions and unprovable theories. The Supreme Court upheld this. In 1927, the infamous case of Buck v. Bell confirmed the legality of forced sterilization. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, wrote Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. That sentence echoed for decades. By the 1940s and 50s, sterilization laws existed in over 30 U.S. states. Thousands were affected. Many never knew it was happening until after it was done. You enter a storage room where charts hang on pegs. One marks family history of feeble-mindedness. Lines in pencil trace downward. Mother moron, aunt imbecile, daughter mongoloid. No names, only categories. Children born with Down syndrome were often institutionalized within weeks. Doctors advised parents not to bond. They were told, these children do not live long. They will never talk. Best to place them early and move on. And many did. You find a letter from a hospital social worker to a new mother. We recommend placement within a licensed facility. Your child will receive the care she needs. Delay may increase trauma. The mother never replied. The child was admitted 10 days later. In Canada, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany, similar programs unfolded. Intelligence testing, sterilization, confinement, often approved by lawmakers, supported by doctors, funded by the state. You walk through a dormitory in Alberta, beds lined with iron rails. A small boy with Down syndrome clutches a stuffed rabbit. He has not spoken today. His chart says unresponsive, requires supervision, recommended for lifelong care, nothing more. In Germany, the policy became lethal. You visit the site of the T4 program named for Tiergartenstrasse 4, the address of the Nazi euthanasia headquarters. Here, thousands of children and adults with disabilities were labeled life unworthy of life. They were removed from homes, transported to institutions, and killed by injection starvation or gas. Children with Down syndrome were among the first targeted. Their faces were recognizable, their delays measurable. They were photographed, examined, and sent to special schools that never had classes. One nurse wrote, "He smiled at me when I tucked in his blanket. He did not cry. He died 2 days later." This state-sponsored murder was disguised as medical care. Parents were told their children had died of pneumonia. They received urns of ashes. Sometimes not even that. After the war, the world recoiled. The Nazi crimes became a line no one wanted to cross again. But sterilization programs in other countries continued. Quietly, through the 1950s, the 1960s, even into the 1970s. You sit in a hearing room where a young woman with Down syndrome is asked if she understands the word marriage. She nods. A judge shakes his head. She cannot grasp the consequences, he says. The sterilization is approved. No one speaks for her. And yet, in the middle of this darkness, small lights remain. You read an article from 1961 about a community home for slow adults. It's modest, a shared kitchen, a garden, a part-time nurse. But the residents are not locked in. They attend dances. They go shopping. One, a man with Down syndrome named Victor, is described as helpful and polite, loves to water plants, knows every bus route in town. In a church bulletin from Ohio, a mother writes, "My son John is not broken. He is not simple. He is John. He knows the hymns better than I do. He folds the bulletins on Saturday night. He belongs here." Still, these stories are rare. Most people with Down syndrome live hidden lives behind gates, behind laws, behind silence. In medical journals, the tone remains cold. One study from 1955 reports, of 50 cases of Mongolism observed, none achieved reading ability. Social functioning remained limited. Long-term care recommended. They were being watched, measured, restricted, but not heard. Photographs from these decades show children in rose uniform haircuts, blank stares, hands folded in laps. Occasionally, a grin sneaks through, a raised hand, a flash of individuality. But the captions erase it. Resident female age 9. Diagnosis Down's idiocy. You sit with that image. You imagine her voice. But it never made the file. In one institution, a boy kept a rock in his pocket. He called it his outside rock. Every day he asked, "Today, go outside." Usually, the answer was no. The rock stayed warm from his hand. These stories are not dramatic. They are not headlines, but they are true. The policies of sterilization and institutionalization robbed thousands of people of futures they never got to choose. It was not about care. It was about control. You leave the hearing room. The lights buzz overhead. A nurse passes you with a chart. Another child has arrived. No one greets him. No one says his name. But you say it quietly to yourself. Just once. The air grows heavy. The shadow of war stretches over Europe and the world. Cities burn. Families scatter. The fabric of society tears. It is the 1930s and 1940s, a time of turmoil and terror. Amid the chaos, a chilling program unfolds, Nazi Germany's T4 euthanasia initiative. You stand outside a gray, unmarked building in Berlin. Its windows are barred. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and smoke. Inside, doctors wear white coats and cold expressions. They review files stacked high, names crossed out, dates recorded. One by one, they decide who will live and who will die. People with Down syndrome were among the first targeted, their faces marked in medical charts, their minds deemed defective. The Nazis called them life unworthy of life. Lebensunwertes Leben. The phrase drips with cruelty. Children as young as infants were taken from families sent to institutions designed for killing. Others were starved or injected with lethal substances. Some died alone. Some never saw their parents again. You find a photograph of a boy with Down syndrome. His eyes are wide innocent. The caption reads, "Patient 3342 euthanized 1941. No cause of death given." Historians still argue about the full scope of this program. Estimates suggest over 200,000 disabled people were murdered during the Nazi regime. Down syndrome was one of many markers used to identify victims. The horrors did not stop at borders. Collaborators in occupied countries assisted. Records from Poland, Austria, and the Netherlands show similar protocols. This was systematic genocide under the guise of mercy. You enter a small room where a nurse recalls hiding a child under blankets to save him from transport. She tells of hearing screams in the night, of the silence after, of the missing children whose names were never spoken again. Outside, the war rages on. Bombs fall. Families are torn apart. After the war, the world struggles to comprehend. Trials condemn some perpetrators. But the damage endures. In the ruins of a hospital, a mother searches for her son. He is gone. The official records say he died of pneumonia. She knows better. You visit a quiet cemetery where a small stone marks the grave of an unknown child. The inscription reads, "Gone but not forgotten." In the decades that follow, awareness of this atrocity grows slowly. But many survivors of institutions bear scars unseen. Families hide their stories, and still the work of remembering continues. You walk away from the cemetery. The wind carries a faint melody, a child's song rising and falling. You cannot place it, but it lingers. The darkest chapter is not forgotten, but the future is still unwritten. You wake to a quieter world. The war is over, but silence lingers like a thick fog. The 1950s and 1960s stretch before you, years of rebuilding repression and uneasy hope. Families bear invisible wounds. Societies look away. You enter a small town in America. Houses are neat, cars shine, children play. But some children never leave their homes. They are hidden away, behind curtains, behind walls. People with Down syndrome remain largely invisible. Institutions still hold many. The public knows little. The media paints simplistic pictures, smiles without complexity, innocence without voice. You visit a mother's kitchen. She speaks softly of her son David. He is 15 but needs help eating. She teaches him songs. She reads to him from worn books. She says, "He is my heart," but others in town whisper. Some say he should be in an institution. She refuses. You attend a church service where a father prays for his daughter to be made whole. The priest offers comfort but little understanding. In schools, integration is rare. Laws allow exclusion. Children with Down syndrome often receive no formal education. Their days pass in quiet homes or state institutions. In one institution, a nurse describes a boy named Carl. He is gentle, she says. He hums softly in the evening, but no one listens. The civil rights movement begins to grow, but disability rights lag behind. Families find each other. They form informal groups. They share stories. They organize. You sit in a basement meeting room. Parents talk about schools, about rights, about hope. They speak softly but firmly. They want their children seen, not hidden. One mother says, "We are tired of being told our children don't belong." In media, a few stories emerge. Television documentaries show children with Down syndrome in their homes. They smile, they play, but the narrative remains limited. A reporter asks a young man with Down syndrome if he wants a job. He nods enthusiastically. The segment ends with hope, but no action. In medicine, research continues. The chromosome 21 anomaly is confirmed in 1959. This discovery changes science. It explains the condition, but does not change lives overnight. You visit a lab where a scientist peers through a microscope. He examines chromosomes. The discovery is groundbreaking, but cold. It diagnoses but does not treat. Families receive mixed messages. There is no cure, doctors say. But we can help with care and support. You walk through a city park. A group of children play together. Among them, a boy with Down syndrome laughs loudly. His mother watches from a bench. She smiles. Outside, society changes slowly. Laws begin to shift. In 1968, the U.S. passes the Architectural Barriers Act, opening some doors. But barriers remain physical, social, legal. You listen to a speech by an advocate who calls for education, for inclusion, for dignity. His words ripple through communities. They plant seeds. Yet discrimination is widespread. Many adults with Down syndrome remain in institutions. Jobs are rare. Friendships are few. You find a newspaper clipping about a man named George. He works in a sheltered workshop. His mother writes, "He is happy, he is safe." But George dreams of more. At night you hear children laughing in the distance. Their voices carry hope and frustration. The story of people with Down syndrome is far from over. You close your eyes. The future awaits. You sit quietly in a small community center, the walls lined with folding chairs and handmade posters. The year is 1970. The air smells faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Families gather here not as isolated individuals, but as a collective voice. This is the beginning of a movement. Parents of children with Down syndrome have had enough. They no longer accept silence or segregation. They demand respect, education, rights. They begin to organize, first informally, then formally. Groups form in cities across the United States and Europe. You listen to a mother named Grace speak softly but firmly. Our children deserve to be seen as people, not problems, she says. They have dreams. They have feelings. They have a place in this world. This era marks the rise of parent advocacy groups. They lobby for legislation, funding, and research. They challenge institutions that isolate. They push for education within public schools. You enter a school where a few children with Down syndrome attend regular classes. It is a small start. Teachers are cautious but curious. Parents watch anxiously, hoping for acceptance. In some places, special classes open within public schools. They are often segregated but provide more than institutions. Children learn social skills, basic reading, and math. Some speak for the first time. You find records of early lawsuits challenging exclusion. Parents fight for their children's right to attend school. Courts begin to rule in favor of inclusion. In the media, stories shift. Documentaries feature people with Down syndrome participating in school plays, sports, and community events. They smile not just for the camera, but with genuine joy. At a university auditorium, a conference on developmental disabilities gathers professionals, parents, and self-advocates. They discuss education methods, vocational training, and community integration. New ideas begin to take hold, yet challenges remain. Funding is scarce. Public attitudes are slow to change. Many people with Down syndrome still live in institutions or are confined to the home. You visit a community workshop where adults with Down syndrome learn skills cooking, gardening, customer service. They earn small wages, they form friendships, they experience independence. One young man named Michael shares his story. "I work at the library," he says proudly. "I help people find books." His smile lights the room. Families learn to advocate not just for care, but for rights. They fight for health care access, for voting rights, for the ability to live independently. You watch a parade celebrating inclusion. People with Down syndrome march alongside their families and friends. Signs read, "Nothing about us without us." The crowd cheers. Behind the scenes, scholars debate best practices. How much support? How much independence? What role does society play? There is no simple answer. You close your eyes and hear laughter, conversation, the sound of a world slowly waking. Change is underway. The story of Down syndrome is no longer just about survival. It is about belonging. You enter a brightly lit classroom filled with colorful posters and soft laughter. The year is now the 1980s. The world around you is changing faster than ever. Technology hums in the background. Television screens flicker, and messages about equality echo through schools and communities. Education for children with Down syndrome has become more common. Many attend public schools alongside their peers. Teachers are trained to include and support them. Curriculums are adapted, but the expectation is clear: these children belong. You watch a young girl named Sarah carefully tracing letters with her finger. She smiles as her teacher praises her progress. Nearby, a boy named James raises his hand confidently. The classroom buzzes with activity, and inclusion is not a goal, but a reality. At home, families report new challenges and new joys. Parents speak of the difficulties of navigating school systems, but also of the pride they feel watching their children grow. Speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. Resources are more available, though not always enough. You hear about the rise of self-advocacy groups. Adults with Down syndrome begin to speak for themselves. They share stories of independence, friendship, and love. They advocate for employment, housing, and community participation. The media begins to change too. Television shows and movies start to feature characters with Down syndrome. Some are played by actors with the condition. Documentaries highlight real lives, not just stereotypes. You walk through a bustling job fair. A young man with Down syndrome speaks with a potential employer. He talks about his skills, his work ethic, and his dreams. The employer nods, impressed. This is not just charity, it is opportunity. Legislation continues to evolve. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 promises protections against discrimination. Schools must provide accommodations. Employers must consider ability, not just appearance or diagnosis. Yet challenges persist. Not all schools are welcoming. Some families still struggle with stigma. Jobs are often low-paying or part-time. Housing options remain limited. Healthcare disparities continue. You visit a community center where adults with Down syndrome gather. They play games, share meals, and discuss their rights. One woman speaks passionately about her wish to live independently. Another talks about dating and marriage. Scholars continue to debate the best ways to support people with Down syndrome. Inclusion versus specialized services. Independence versus safety nets. No simple answers, only ongoing efforts. You sit quietly and listen to a choir composed mostly of people with Down syndrome. Their voices rise in harmony, strong and clear. You feel the weight of history lift, even if only slightly. The world is waking up, slowly, steadily. The story is still being written. You stroll through a bustling city park where families, picnic children play, and the sunlight dances on green leaves. The calendar reads the early 2000s. The world feels more connected than ever. Social media buzzes, smartphones beep, and information flows endlessly. Visibility is no longer a privilege. It is expected. People with Down syndrome are no longer invisible. They appear on television shows, in movies, and in advertisements. Some are actors, others are models. They speak openly about their lives, their challenges, their hopes. You watch a documentary featuring a young woman named Lily. She talks about her job, her friendships, and her love of music. She laughs easily and tells the camera, "I want people to see me, not my syndrome." Social media platforms provide new opportunities. Parents share stories and photos. Self-advocates post videos of daily life hobbies and achievements. The world sees their humanity in real time. Fashion shows include models with Down syndrome. Designers celebrate diversity, breaking old norms of beauty. A young man walks the runway with confidence, his smile radiant. In education, inclusion is widespread. Children attend neighborhood schools. Individualized education plans help tailor support. Extracurricular activities welcome everyone. Sports teams, theater groups, and clubs grow more diverse. Workplaces adapt as well. Companies hire people with Down syndrome in roles ranging from clerical work to customer service to creative arts. Vocational programs connect job seekers with employers. Laws protect against discrimination and promote accessibility. Healthcare advances improve quality of life. Early intervention programs. Better therapies and medical research increase longevity and health. Families receive more support. Community programs thrive. Yet barriers remain. Stigma persists in some places. Accessibility varies. Funding is inconsistent. Representation, while improved, is still limited. You visit a school auditorium where a play features actors with Down syndrome. The audience applauds wildly. Behind the scenes, friendships flourish, talents grow, and barriers fall. You read online comments, some supportive, others ignorant. The fight for respect is ongoing. Self-advocates champion the mantra, "Nothing about us without us." They demand a voice in decisions that affect their lives. You sit quietly and watch a young man with Down syndrome teaching sign language to children at a community center. His patience and joy are evident. The narrative has shifted from invisibility to visibility, from silence to voice. But the journey continues. You find yourself walking down a tree-lined street in a small American town. The year is now the mid-2020s. The air smells of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Children play, neighbors greet each other, and the rhythm of life moves gently forward. People with Down syndrome are part of every community. They live in homes of their own, work jobs. They enjoy, attend college, and participate in social and political life. Laws protect their rights, but the work to enforce those rights continues. You visit a group home where adults with Down syndrome live independently with support. They cook meals, pay bills, and make plans for weekends. One resident, Anna, talks about her job at a local library. Another, Marcus, is learning to drive. Education has evolved dramatically. Children with Down syndrome attend schools alongside their peers from kindergarten through college. Inclusion is no longer optional. It is expected. Healthcare has improved with advances in cardiology, endocrinology, and therapies tailored to individuals. Life expectancy has increased dramatically from the past centuries. Yet challenges remain. Access to quality health care varies. Employment opportunities still lag behind. Social stigma, while diminished, is not gone. Independent living can be difficult to secure. Advocacy groups push for better medical care, housing, employment, and respect. They fight against discrimination and misinformation. They work to dismantle remaining barriers. You attend a conference where self-advocates speak with confidence about their experiences. They discuss relationships, work community involvement, and future goals. One speaker says, "We want to live our best lives. We want to be heard and respected." Families and allies work alongside people with Down syndrome to build inclusive communities. The focus shifts from protection to empowerment. You walk along a river at sunset. The water is calm. The sky is soft pink and orange. The sounds of laughter drift from a nearby park where children with and without disabilities play together. The story of people with Down syndrome is no longer just survival. It is about thriving, belonging, and joy. The journey is not over, but the future shines brighter. You close your eyes, feeling the gentle breeze and distant laughter. The story fades slowly like a soft whisper.